Shabbat Shalom, everyone. So, how is everyone doing today? Good. At least the weather is good, if nothing else. So, I would like to dedicate this week's Torah teaching to the memory of my dad. For some reason, I have been thinking of him a lot. It has something to do with my relationship with him, and I just think back at how, growing up, being when you're younger, you have this fear of your parents about if I do something wrong, if I'm not a good boy, I get spanked or something, or some privilege is taken away from me. But as you get older and your relationship with your parents mature, or your father in particular, because fathers are usually associated with fear. You can always, with mommy, you can maybe you can get away with some things, but with daddy, you know that you're gonna get whacked, or he's gonna be really hard on you. So, but as you grow older, you begin to, your relationship with your father starts changing, and you're no longer afraid of what he's going to do to you, because, you're a man of your own. And it becomes more like you begin to, you still have that fear and reverence. You still have that, respect. In fact, for me, my respect for my father has grown and grown and grown and keeps growing now that I am a father of my own and I have kids. And sometimes I say, so my dad went through all this, like all these stages of my life when I was this much of a baby, right? And then growing up, he, I remember times I used to tell my kids, because one of the favorite punishments I like to give them is just come sit down for some time, just stand there, just go stand and just sit down there or stand there. And that's the punishment my dad used to give me then, And now I understand why he always used to tell me, go and sit down, just sit down, just do nothing, sit down there for the next 15 minutes. So, but it was always the case initially that you would fear what he would do, but as you grow older, it becomes more of, now it's more like, not what he will do to me, but what can I do so that my father will be proud of me? How can I don't want to do anything that will hurt him. I don't want to do anything that would bring his name to disrepute. I want to honor him. I want to, now that he's not even here on this earth anymore, I'm thinking, how can I, carry on his legacy? The great things he did, how can I, carry it on? Because one of the things my dad did was he helped a lot of people find work. And when I learned about giving and Rambam's, I don't know if you've ever seen Rambam's list of the gradations of giving. where the highest level of giving is when you don't just give someone a handout, but you don't give someone a fish. You also help the person, catch fish, essentially, right? So it's the highest form of giving. So when I think of all those things, I'm like, wow, my dad was really great because he helped so many people, find work. So I begin to appreciate him even more and more, and it's kind of connected to something I didn't have time to look at it last week, which was part of the Torah. Can I go back here? Okay, sorry. I think yeah. Oh, that way. Oh, okay. That's counterintuitive. Actually, I should be looking up there, right? But I don't trust my eyes, even with my glasses. I'll try. I can go back now. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So last week I didn't get to talk a lot about the fear of God, but so Moses exhorted the people to remember the revelation at Sinai, right? That had been seen and heard by millions of people. Thus, the entire nation could testify to what they had witnessed and share it with their descendants. And in Deuteronomy 5 verse 29, it says, "Oh, that they had such a heart in them that they would fear me and keep all my commandments always, that it may be well with them and with their sons forever." So one of the big themes in last week's Torah portion was the fear of God. And God, I was actually going through the portion and trying to look at all the places where it talked about the fear of God. And there was quite a few of them. So all those verses, I would like us to go through some of them. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 2. So it says, "That you may fear the Lord your God, you and your son and your son's sons, by keeping all his statutes and his commandments, which I command you all the days of your life, and that your days may be long." See? So here it says that we might fear, that you may fear the Lord your God, you and your sons and your sons' sons. So, it talks about fearing God, you, your sons, and your sons' sons. So like a generational thing, transmitting the fear of God to your son and to your grandsons. And that's a big challenge for me as a father, that I should transmit the fear of God to my sons and to my son's sons. So I even have a role to play in my son's sons. And I guess for me, that's the biggest legacy, aside from, material things, that I can leave for my children. The fear of God, that they will know God, that they will fear God, because, everything in this world is eventually going to burn. I was telling one of my sons the other day that there was an opportunity for him to do a good deed. and it had to do with food. And I said, we don't get that opportunity all the time. Like one time a neighbor of mine came and she wanted milk, and I was so, I was like, oh, this is an opportunity for me to do a mitzvah, and I just grabbed the milk and gave her the whole gallon. I was really excited to do it because I know that when I drink that milk, it ends up in the, in the washroom. But when I give it to somebody, it's in my heavenly account and it's eternal. So transmitting the fear of God to my children. And I was talking about how my relationship with my father changed from being afraid of what he would do to me to how I was afraid of not offending him or not making him, not making him, to defend the honor of his name, to carry on his legacy, to be able for him to be proud of me. I was afraid not to do anything that would cause him embarrassment. So I believe that that's how, our relationship with God should also develop, where, initially, some of us, before or when we came to the Lord, it was because it was like for fire insurance, the fear of hell, I don't know if, I think it was in the 80s or in the 70s, the Left Behind, A Thief in the Night. There was this movie, A Thief in the Night, and of course the Left Behind series, and we watched some of those movies, and you wouldn't be able to sleep at night because you'll be afraid that, oh, maybe you wake up in the middle of the night and you're like, oh, has the rapture taken place? Have I been left behind? Or things like that. So many people come to the Lord with that childish fear of wanting to be sure they don't end up in eternal hell. But beyond that, I think as we mature in our faith, it's more about what we, having that relationship where we still have that fear and reverence, but it's about protecting the honor of his name. In chapter 6, verse 13, what does it say there? It is the Lord your God you shall fear, him you shall serve, and by his name you shall swear. So it is the Lord your God you shall fear, him you shall serve, by his name you shall swear. I mean, Yeshua advised that it's better not to swear, right? Let your yes be yes, and let your no be no. But then if you had to swear, it is by his name you would swear, right? And not by the name of other gods. And because I think it had something to do with the culture then, because they didn't have written contracts and things like that. So your word was your bond. So it was in order to give credibility or to give assurance to the other party that you would do what you would say, you would swear. So, but then it's saying here that it is the Lord your God you shall fear, and no other. Because, they had other gods, and I mean the culture of that time, they had gods of different gods, and it was the case that they would, they feared that if they didn't pacify the god of agriculture, their crops would not grow. If they didn't pacify the god of, rain, the rain would not fall, right? They had that fear of those different gods. They didn't have that sense of one true God who was ruler over all. In verse 24 of chapter 6, and the Lord commanded us to do all these statutes, to fear the Lord our God for our good always, that he might preserve us alive as we are this day. So it says, and the Lord commanded us to do all these statutes, to fear the Lord our God for our good always, that he might preserve us alive as we are this day. So we are to fear him for our own good. And even as the Bible says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And the fear of the Lord keeps us away from sin. I think it's also in the book of Proverbs. And I think I ended my talk last week with where the Bible talks about true wisdom. House is built by understanding, it's fortified, and then by knowledge, it's filled with treasures. Because the fear of God is like, I was trying to paint the mental image, picture of, trying to build a house. You get a piece of land. The first thing you do, you pull out all the weeds and all the rubbish on the land and clear it away before you start digging. And then you build the structure, and then you build, you build the structure. And because you can't, if there's an open field, there are no walls, there's no boundaries. You set the boundaries, then it's all secure. And then as we begin to acquire knowledge, and knowledge is not just, mental knowledge, but because knowing in Hebraic thinking has to do with experiential knowing. And, when it's the term used when Adam knew his wife and they had a child, right? It's an experiential kind of knowing. In 10 verse 20, you shall fear the Lord your God, you shall serve him and hold fast to him, and by his name you shall swear. It's kind of a repetition of the one we read. 13 verse 4, you shall walk after the Lord your God and fear him and keep his commandments and obey his voice, and you shall serve him and hold fast to him. I don't know what it says in your own version. Deuteronomy chapter 13 verse 5. What does it say in your version? Here it says, you shall walk after the Lord your God, fear him, keep his commandments, obey his voice, and you shall serve him and hold fast to him. What does it say in your version? Cling to him. What does yours say? Anybody else? Yours says cleave. Okay, so in Genesis, just like as I was talking about, if I can find it, it says, therefore shall a man leave his wife, and he shall cleave. I can't remember the scripture, but in the book of Genesis, it talks about cleaving, right? So here it's almost the case that, chapter 13 verse 4 says, you shall walk after the Lord your God, fear him, keep his commandments, obey his voice, and you shall serve him and cleave to him. It's almost, the picture it paints in my mind is, you can walk after the Lord your God, you can fear him, you can keep his commandments, but obeying his voice begins to feel more intimate, because his commandments are specified in the Torah. Because the people who killed Yeshua, they were very scrupulous in the keeping of the Torah, but beyond walking in his ways, beyond fearing him, which is the first step, and has levels. Obeying his voice, talks about like a relationship, because it's like you are hearing him speak to you. So it's getting more intimate. And now it says cleaving to him. Even in the New Testament, it says faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God, right? Our faith is a faith comes by hearing. We hear his word. And there's an intimacy and a relationship involved in hearing. Not just doing his commandments as written, fulfilling the letter of the law. That's great, and that's inevitable. That's first step. But then we begin to get more intimate, and then we're cleaving to him, we're holding on to him. That it describes that intimacy between Adam and Eve in the book of Genesis. And the last one, verse 11, what does it say here? And all Israel shall hear and fear, and never again do any such wickedness as this among you. So here it's talking about all Israel should hear and fear and never do again any such wickedness. No, this one is not a good one. Okay, so let's move on to... Sorry? Oh, I missed that, I guess. I was looking for fear God. All Israel shall hear, Shema, and fear, and never again do such wickedness as this among you. That's a good point. All Israel shall Shema, hear, So I was going to give a couple of examples of practical ways, like, what the fear of God makes us do. So in the book of Leviticus 19 verse 13, it says, if a worker was hired by the day, his employer has until morning. Okay, let's read Leviticus 19 verse 13. 19:13. You shall not oppress your neighbor or rob him. The wages of a hired servant shall not remain with you all night until the morning. So this is some commandments that God gave to the children of Israel in the book of Leviticus. And here it's talking about if you as an employer, you hire a worker by the day, that you have until morning to pay him if he was hired for the night, and he must be paid by the next evening if he was hired for the night. So if he was hired for the day, at the end of the day you pay him. At least where I come from, it's very common practice that people work and they don't get paid for months, sometimes for years. They don't just get paid. And it's against Torah. And I myself have been guilty in this area, and because I knew this scripture, I was so terrified. Because there was a time I hired some people to work for me, and my intention was to pay them after the job, but I wasn't paid myself, and I didn't have the means to pay them, and I was crying because I didn't know what to do. I was just broken because I knew I was like, I knew the scripture, so I knew I had to pay them. I should have paid them like right away, but I had no means to pay them. And immediately I got the funds, I paid them, but it shattered me inside. in verse 14 of that same chapter, you shall not curse the deaf or put a stumbling block before the blind, but you shall fear God. I am the Lord. So in addition to the literal meaning here, so a deaf, you shouldn't curse a deaf person who can't hear you, right? And you shouldn't mislead a blind person who can't see. You should fear God. So in addition to the literal meaning, one may not give bad advice to an unsuspecting person or cause someone to sin. And I think Yeshua also talked about this. He said that it's better for a millstone to be hung around the neck of a person and the person should be thrown into the sea than to cause another person to sin. Right? So this is another way of, non-literal way of reading that scripture. Putting a stumbling block before the blind. Because, sometimes people are innocent and you give them bad advice, or sometimes I don't expect that any of us would, but maybe inadvertently, I mean, one example which comes to mind, it just comes to mind again, and it keeps coming to my mind over and over again, but I've probably talked about it previously, where in my the previous denomination I attended, it was a sin to taste alcohol, and because of that, we were instructed in church that if our parents asked us to go and purchase, so if my dad called me and said, "Hey, go buy me a bottle of beer," you were supposed to tell him that it's a sin to drink beer, and you don't do it. And I said, I've talked about it quite a few times, that I did that, and now that I'm grown up and I look back and I'm like, how stupid was I, And that's why the responsibility is on us, to be like the Berean Christians, to like as Paul the Apostle, when he taught, he said they were very noble, and they checked the scriptures to see whether those things were so. How would I know? Like, that's as much as I knew then, and thinking about it now, I'm like, I was being taught to dishonor my parents because of a tradition, in contradiction to scripture. So it's important, and that's why it's important that we know and we understand the scriptures, and that's what Yeshua rebuked the Pharisees for, that they sometimes put the traditions of men above the Torah. That's where he had issues with them, where sometimes you just get wrapped up in these traditions and you forget what the Torah actually says. And some of those things are to help you keep the Torah, but it's been so many layers of tradition have wrapped around. I mean, a lot of the traditions are great. Even Apostle Paul said, he told the Thessalonians that you should follow the traditions which he left for them. The example, the tradition, of hard work, for example. But, sometimes these traditions get in the way of fulfilling Torah. And then last one, it says, in verse 15, it says, you shall do no injustice in court. You shall not be partial to the poor or defer to the great, but in righteousness shall you judge your neighbor. So, and here I wrote that it's improper for a judge to rule in favor of the poor litigant, so that he will be supported in dignity. Justice must be rendered honestly. So, I mean, I'm thinking of today when people talk about social justice. I'm wondering if I think that's kind of, I might be wrong here, but because justice is justice. When you qualify it, then you kind of diminish it. So I think a lot of times when people are pushing for social justice, I think it's this kind of anti-Torah thinking where you want to rule in favor of the poor because that seems like the right thing to do. But Torah says that Lady Justice is blind. You don't rule in favor of the poor just because they are poor. You rule what is right, as a judge. And in our own lives too, situations where you look at this person and you look at the other person and you're looking at the people and you're sizing them up and you are judging based on not what the issue is, but based on what you feel should be the right thing, right? Where, judges would commute sentences or give less penalty to people who commit certain crimes because of their race or because of their economic situation. In Torah, you are responsible for your actions. God told Cain that sin crouches at your door, but you have the power to overcome it. So the responsibility is on you. We don't blame people for our misfortunes. We take responsibility. Okay, so let me move on. Okay, so this week's Torah portion talks about the choice of a blessing or curse, destruction of the Canaanite worship places, where God designated and said that worship should only be at the place God chooses, and prohibition against eating blood, and prohibition of eating sacrifices away from the place God chooses. I just when the Bible talks about prohibition against eating blood, I remember in the book of Acts as well. I think Acts 15. It's also it's among the things that the apostles suggested should be prohibited from like new believers were to stay away from eating blood. Let me see here. Okay, I think it's verse 22. It says, "Then it seemed good to the apostles and elders with the whole church to choose men." No, is that where it is? I'm looking for where it talks about the prohibition against eating blood. Okay, yeah, I think I see it. 29? 20? Okay, yeah. "But should write to them to abstain from the things polluted by idols, from sexual immorality, and from what has been been strangled, and from blood." So even in the New Testament here, or the apostolic scriptures, we see that this prohibition from eating blood is upheld. We are not to eat blood. I was listening to someone who was talking about blood Is it blood sandwiches? Sorry? Does, is it blood pudding? Yeah. Yeah. I'd never heard of that before. But so,
English thing
yes, it's an English thing.
from the UK.
Well,
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
So like, kind of like you use a starch
Mhm.
grain,
Mhm.
also thickens
uh-huh.
when it coagulates.
Okay. So they would put like blood.
Liquid blood, and then cook it, and that way it would solidify it.
And then they will add, like I hear they would add like like pig's blood, and then they will add some fat from the pig,
Yep.
and
Yep. It's basic cooking.
It's very prevalent also. But if you think of it like the strangling, if you think of it the strangling aspect, when an animal gets strangled,
Mhm.
its blood doesn't get drained, so
Mhm.
it stays in the meat,
Mhm.
like it pools.
Mhm. Yeah,
So is this working with any kind of animal?
yeah,
Any animal.
any animal blood, yes. So God doesn't want us eating. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I mean,
I think people make blood sausage,
Blood.
blood pudding, or things
Yeah.
like that.
Anyway, go on. Go on.
yeah.
Go on.
No, it's okay. I like to connect with, people and what they are familiar with, right? Yeah, so it's really interesting that God doesn't want us to consume blood. And thinking about it, I mean, why do you think? I don't know. Maybe it falls under the statutes, one of those commandments that we don't really know why, right? But it's one of those commandments that God just says, do not do it. But
The blood is the life force,
the blood
Yes,
is,
the life is in the blood.
soul is in the blood.
Life is in the blood.
yes.
I think it's Leviticus 17:11 or 11:17.
Mhm. Nefesh, yeah. But you know what? Soul. Life is in the blood, soul.
It's connected with the sacrifices.
Yeah, that's what I was.
Yeah.
My understanding was that it was the petting and sacrifices,
Yeah.
like cutting themselves.
Yes.
And then like cutting themselves for the dead or whatever.
hmm So you are suggesting that God told his people to abstain from eating blood because the pagans were doing it, and he wanted his people to be separate,
It's
set apart, to be different. Okay?
as we have learned before, right?
Yes.
That blood is connected with life.
Yes.
So when it is that nefesh thing in the blood,
hmm
and now when we are eating it, it is an abomination to God,
hmm
because God is the one who giveth life,
hmm
and we are ending life because of it. So it's commanded for us also when we cut the animals, the blood goes into the ground.
To the ground, yeah.
Just to mention part of that chapter, in the beginning, was it Abel's blood cried out from the ground?
Abel's blood cried out from the ground, yes. Okay. You wanted to say something about it? About the blood?
No, just what was already brought up about that, how I can remember.
Okay.
What verse was it? I couldn't find the verse.
Leviticus 17:11.
Oh, 17 on, okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So one thought I have about the, one explanation I heard about one of the reasons why God doesn't want us consuming blood. One thing God hates is mixture. God hates mixture. I mean, even Yeshua talked about, like in the book of Revelation, he says, I would rather that you're hot or you are cold. If you're lukewarm, I'll spew you out of my mouth. God hates mixture. A while ago I was talking about the Zarat, the leprous, the skin of the leper if he was 100% white all the way, like covered with leprosy, he was clean. Because he was 100%, there was no mixture. But if he had patches of white and patches of good skin, he was unclean. Which goes to illustrate the fact that God hates mixture. And it's a very consistent theme, and he wants his people to be separate, yes. But thinking more deeply about it, on, I can't remember which day again, I think it was the 5th day, God created animals, right? Was it the 5th day or 6th day? Whatever. I think it was the 5th day. 6th. 6 was humans. So when he created animals, he said, let animals spring up, right? And they just sprang up. There was no transmission from him. He didn't breathe into a cow and say, become a cow, right? But when he made man, God breathed into man the breath of life. He gave man part of himself, the divine soul. But the animal soul was not from God. So, the blood carries the soul, right? There's the nefesh is in the blood, even of the animals. And when we consume the blood of animals, then it's as if we are intermingling the animal soul with the divine soul which we carry. Right? And God doesn't like that mixture. I mean, it's it's one explanation I heard, and I think it makes a lot of sense to me, and I find it very plausible. So, the other thing about these verses where it talks about worshiping only at the place that God chooses. Initially, like Abraham made altars everywhere when he stopped, I think at Bethel and at different locations, which I can't remember right now, but he was building altars. Jacob did the same, Isaac did the same, and all through the history of the Israelites, they built private altars. If you wanted to dedicate yourself to God and all that, you build an altar. So, but here God gave the instruction that, okay, that time would, and it appeared to happen in phases where, because at some point, Shiloh was the place, right, where the ark was kept for many, many years, right? But then eventually God chose Jerusalem and said, this is the place where my name is to be placed forever. Even after that, there were some exceptions where Elijah built when he was he was fighting against the prophets of Baal, and Jezebel came after him. He built an altar there, right? But I mean, he was a prophet. He was. You better be a prophet of God that hears directly from God, and God says it's okay to build him an altar outside Jerusalem. So, because of his stature as a prophet and the fact that it was God that told him to do it for the honor of his name, that was kind of like an exception to the general rule that God does not want any sacrifices outside Jerusalem after it was designated as the place to bring sacrifices to him. It was Shiloh until I think it's in the book of Jeremiah somewhere. Talks about how that was my place, but because you guys, you didn't, you were disobedient to me, so I had to take my ark and my name away from that place. And he chose Jerusalem, and he chose Zion, right? He chose the Temple Mount, where it is today, as the place where his name is to be placed forever. And that's why we see in the world today that, why there's so much energy, spiritual energy there, because it can't be any other place. That's the place God has chosen. And, the forces, the anti-God, people who don't want God's name to be exalted are fighting to prevent that from happening. The other thing I found a bit curious was, the destruction of the Canaanite worship places. They were to go, they were to break it down, they were to burn it, and these are some of the scriptures that people who don't believe in the authenticity of God's words, these are some of the scriptures they come up with to say, how can God permit such destruction, right? But it appears that at a certain time in Israel's history, Israel was like God's agent, direct agent in executing his judgments. But after a certain period, that era ceased. Because he said, my own arm brought salvation. Initially, Israel was like God's agent to execute his judgments in the world. God chose Israel as his inheritance, and the means, it was like his proxy for judgment, in executing judgment against the nations at that time. But that era where, because they would go into a place, they would hack down, they would knock down all the idols, they would burn them, they would, but later on, God said, I myself will bring salvation. His own arm brought salvation. Him alone, on his own. He wouldn't need that agency anymore. When exactly that happened is kind of tricky to locate, but there was a transition away from that direct agency where, because some of these things are still in practice in some other religions, like Islam, where I know, like in Nigeria, for example, we have a form of radical, I think it's Sunni, Islam, where they still practice some of those, and I guess specifically here, you be walking on the street and you see people without hands, without arms, because they stole, I guess that's a bad example, but that's like a literal, where it says, cutting off the arm, and like they are taking literally something that's figurative, basically. So, and I know that in Islam, they still practice that. When you come into a place, you burn it down, you destroy it, and you dominate, you conquer, that kind of mentality. They probably got it from here, seeing themselves as the replacement for Israel, and in fact the church. Because I remember once when I was in Finland, I was talking about, just like as I was talking about it right now, in Islam, this, that, and the other, and they said, whoa, I think you're forgetting Christian history. Because Christianity years ago, under the Crusades and this is what they were doing. They were burning and killing and destroying and they were killing people in the name of God. So it's in our history. Specifically killing Jews, murdering them, burning them like alive. Because they were looking at this scripture and saying that, okay, we are now God's agents. We have replaced the children of Israel. So now the kingdom is here, and now we are supposed to go and dominate the world for Christ. And it was a terrible time in Christian history where a lot of blood was shed. So I think I forgot, because it's easy to have that blind spot where you're talking about other religions and you forget that your own religion is just as bad or terrible. In fact, I would almost say that the modern form of radical Islam we have today, they probably learnt it from Christianity because that's exactly what they were doing. Because at that time, the Muslims were the scholars, they were the refined ones, and the Christians, the Crusaders at that time, they were the terrorists. Also, in connection to we had this, excuse me. We had this conversation about the tablets last week, and talking about whether it was engraved, right? So I saw this interesting piece in PK Avot, and in fact it was in the prayer book. So, and it says in Exodus 32 verse 16, and the tablets are the work of God, and the writing is God's writing, engraved on the tablets. So the Hebrew word for that, engraved, it was engraved on tablets. It said, read not engraved, harut, right? I know my fellow Hebrew students here will recognize chet, resh, vav, and tav, right? So those are the Hebrew letters. And this is an encouragement for us to learn Hebrew. Even if it's just the alphabet, it just changes the way you see scriptures. It's revolutionary. So read not engraved, harut, but liberty, chairut, chairut. So you put, that's the smallest letter in the Hebrew alphabet. That's a, sorry? No, not yod, the yod. So if you put a yod in there, charut becomes cheirut, because in Hebrew there's no vowels, right? So how do we know about the vowels? By tradition. So not all tradition is bad. In fact, we wouldn't be able to read the Bible without tradition, because how would you know how to pronounce a word? So that word, and those are the root letters in the word. So you could really change the meaning of words just by changing the vowels. So that word engraved, which is harut, by adding a yod, it changes the meaning of the word to cherut, which is liberty. So, and the rabbis, from the Ethics of the Fathers. Ethics of the Fathers is like, it's a tractate in the Talmud And it's it's that tractate that doesn't have any laws. It's just all wise sayings. And interestingly, at this time of the year, um, counting the Omer, before we get to Shavuot, there's a tradition to study Pirkei Avot. So this Harut, which you could change to Herut when you add the Yod, the comment there is that there is no free individual except for he who occupies himself with the study of Torah. And whoever occupies himself with the study of Torah is elevated. You know, I think it was Brad Young that suggested that, I can't remember how much, but a lot of the New Testament was derived from the ethics of the fathers. Because I think, is it not the book of James where it talks about the perfect law of liberty? If we go to James, I can't remember what chapter or verse, but I want us to read that. James chapter. Someone should help me here. James. James 1,
Yeah, 23 and 24.
23 and 24.
Through 25.
Up to 25. Okay, let's
I
read.
think that's what you're trying to do.
Yes, that's where I'm trying to go. If I can find my book of James. Okay, James 1,
It's 25.
25, huh?
Yeah, kind of all three verses.
All three.
That's the same thing.
Okay. So it says, but, okay, I'll start with, 22, start from 22. But be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man who looks intently at his natural face in a mirror. For he looks at himself and goes away and at once forgets what he was like. But the one who looks into the perfect law of liberty and perseveres, being no hearer who forgets, but a doer who acts, he will be blessed in his doing. See? So you see that understanding of the law being engraved on the tablets of stone by inserting a yod in that word harut and deriving herut, which means liberty. The rabbis were able to derive the fact that through Torah, that a man who doesn't, like, you can only attain liberty, freedom, by living. And I think James even expounds it further to say the law is the law of liberty. Torah liberates, contrary to what, we've been taught traditionally, that the law brings you into bondage and all that. It's a law of liberty. And that's what James is talking about here. And it derives from this Exodus 32, verse 16. So it's a very well-known drash or kind of teaching or derivation. And because this is what, a lot of the rabbis who came up with things like this, in those days, they had the whole Torah memorized. And then they would fiddle around with the letters and try and see what, because they talk about 70 faces of the Torah. This is one of those masterpieces, those things those jewels you derive from the Torah and from Hebrew. And that's where James got his teaching from about the law of liberty. So, does anyone have any comments about anything? Okay. For the last few minutes, I wanted to look at in the book of looking at the book of Deuteronomy as a whole, and looking at all we've studied. We see that the book of Deuteronomy is structured around three main topics, and the different chapters of Deuteronomy. Moses' first address, the historical review and exhortation. So in chapter 1 to 4, it was mostly talking about the history. In chapter 1 to 3, he talks about the journey of the Israelites from Mount Sinai to their current location on the plains of Moab, including the sending of the 12 spies, the people's rebellion, and the subsequent wanderings in the wilderness. Then in chapter 4, Moses exhorts the people to obey God's laws and remember their unique covenant relationship with Him. So that's the first address. Then the second address, he reviews the law. We know that in the book of Deuteronomy, the 10 words or the 10 commandments, like we know them as, he recounted them in chapter 5, and he talked about from 5 to 11. He talks about the general principles of the covenant, emphasizing love and loyalty to God. And then I think I might have transposed some things here, because this is chapters 12 to 26. Oh yes, I'm on course. Chapter 12 to 26, he talks about, so in these chapters 5 to 26, he now begins to go into details, of what the Torah is all about, right? And if you follow the yearly Torah cycle as well, I find it very interesting that when you look at the 3-year Torah cycle, it seems the 3-year Torah cycle seems to be more ancient, right? So when they came up with the 1-year cycle, what they did was, it seemed like they grouped certain chunks of the 3-year cycle, brought them together to form one chunk of the yearly cycle. So that's why you see, for example, this Parsha 135, because it's broken down to, I don't know how many, 150 something. So you will see that there's 4 chunks of the 3-year cycle to make up one chunk of the yearly cycle for Re'eh. So Re'eh means sea, right? So it fits nicely. Like I find it fascinating, really, because it fits exactly within that 3-year cycle. So it's like they just took 1, 2, 3, 4, boom, make one chunk of the yearly cycle, and then all through the 3-year cycle, you could fit them in to all the yearly cycles. So chapters 12 to 26, here you have more detailed laws and statutes covering various aspects of Israelite life, including worship, leadership, justice, and community conduct. And then the third address, chapter 27 to 30, instructions for a covenant, the renewal ceremony to be held on Mount Ebal and Gerizim. And then the final instructions, 31 to 34. So there were 3 main discourses that Moses had right? Introduction, details, and kind of like wrapping it all up. If you follow the book of Deuteronomy. And this week's Torah portion is like the beginning of the second part where he begins to get into the details. So here Moses said, see, I'm setting before you blessing and a curse. So before getting into the details of the statutes, the judgments, Moses was like, he began to put everything into perspective and say, look, the summary of everything I'm telling you is that, saying that, so Moses began to put the commandments into perspective, saying that whether or not to accept the Torah is nothing less than the choice between blessing and curse. So Torah is about, are you going to accept Torah or are you going to reject it? You know, I like the way the stone Humash put it. He said, see, I am setting before you today a blessing and a curse. Verse 27, the blessing, he puts a colon there. The blessing is, if you listen to the commandments of the Lord your God, which I am commanding you today, that's the blessing. If you listen to the commandments of the Lord your God, which I am commanding you today. And the curse. See, the comma is, I got this from the new NASB, but the Stone Humash puts a colon there. So I put both. So the curse, what is the curse? If you do not listen. So if you listen, that's the blessing. If you do not listen, that's the curse. To the commandments of the Lord your God, but turn aside from the way which I am commanding you today, by following other gods which you have not known. You know, so the blessing and the curse. So as believers, even as believers, you know, areas of our lives where we struggle might be areas where we're experiencing a curse. You know, blessing is, you know, where you put in a little effort and you get a lot. But a curse is where you're laboring and you're not producing much. Or maybe that which you are producing is being devoured. You know? So Torah is about blessing and curse. It's not a salvation issue. You know, salvation is by grace through faith, and that's the Torah based on Torah. It's not a New Testament teaching. You know, the Jews have always believed that salvation is by grace through faith. One last thing I want to talk about is about Mount Gerizim. So Moses told them that when they got into the land, that they should go on top of two mountains, Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. So Mount Gerizim, people have tried, I mean, it's one of those things that people have been trying to figure out. Why did God say, do this on these two mountains? And according to Ramban, he explains that it has to do with the location of the two mountains. So Mount Gerizim is to the south, which is the right side of a person who turns eastward. So let's say this is east. Where is east here? I don't know. That's east? Like this? Oh, like this.
Where the Aram Kodesh is.
Where the Aron Kodesh is. So that's east. Aha, great. So if I'm facing east, then to my right would be the south, right? And then my left would be the north. So, and my back. Sorry about that. So if this is east, then that will be west, and this will be south, and this will be north. So the whole idea is that Mount Gerizim, which is the mountain of blessing, was on the right side, and Mount Ebal which is the mountain of the curse, was on the left side, right, on the north, and Gerizim was on the south. So they were to stand on those two mountains and pronounce the blessing and the curse. Like it was supposed to be like a graphic picture to illustrate to them, the blessings and the curse that would come on them if they did not keep Torah. But Samson Raphael Hirsch, his own explanation of the two mountains was that Mount Gerizim, I mean, it's disputed, but Mount Gerizim, which is the mountain of blessing, is lush and green, right? And Mount Ebal is rocky, it's hard, it's dusty. So it was supposed to illustrate to them, if you're following Torah, you are blessed and green and lush like Mount Gerizim, which is on the right. And if you didn't obey Torah, and you would be like Mount Ebal, which is rocky, dusty, and had no growth. And the interesting thing is that both of them were exposed to the same conditions, the same amount of rain, the same amount of everything. But one of them blossomed while the other was barren. So Shabbat Shalom.